I want to start out part two with some assumptions that I found this list I thought to be really helpful that are derived from themes. So remember what a theme is it's a statement, a universal statement about human nature or a belief that somebody holds, and it's embedded in the book somewhere. And so the book comments on each of these statements of belief, essentially. So the first one, and I want to ask yourself, where do you fall in terms of believing and aligning yourself with this statement or not? And how does the book comment on it? So the first one, relationships with family members are the most important in life. Many people would say yes, absolutely. And this book seems to confirm that fact, although Jim doesn't really have a family and he doesn't have a relationship with his grandparents. Tiny and Lena both reject that idea of family, so maybe not. Number two, real Americans are those who've been in this country for at least 3 generations and who speak English. According to this, Antonia and Lena and Tiny, who have all made it, well, not quite Antonia, but all of these young women are not real Americans. So where do you kind of align yourself with that reading and perspective? What makes an American? Number three, stereotyping is based on observations of actual events or habits and is therefore not disrespectful to a group. Well, it's fine to assume that the Shimerdas are very self-centered, self-focused, and prideful. They want what other people have because, well, Mrs. Shimerda was that way. So therefore, the rest of her family and other immigrants from Bohemia are also the same way, right? Or wrong. Number four, growing up requires one to separate from home, friends, and family. And so it would seem. And yet, Antonia doesn't do this. Do all of the characters grow up and leave home? Do they come back? Tiny doesn't, Lena doesn't, Jim doesn't. Number five, most people immigrate to the US to make money. Was that the case for any of the families? Some, yes. Do they end up making money? Yeah, they're driven by money. But why? And is that their initial motivation, or what puts that motivation in a person? Perhaps it's having nothing and being nothing that gives them that craving for success in a material way. Who knows? What about number six? Women who do men's jobs deserve to be looked down upon. That was actually the truth for so long. It's changed now, but what do you think? Where do you fall on that spectrum? In fact, all of our female characters are doing men's jobs and they didn't really have another choice. Number seven, home really is where the heart is. Another kind of cliche that we hear. It doesn't seem to be that way, does it, for any of our characters? None of them seem to find their heart at home. And number eight, a good education makes a good person. And which of our individuals are educated? Only Jim. And does that conclude that the other characters are not good people? So in many ways, what Willa Cather is doing is she's challenging stereotypes and expectations of her day. That's what really good authors do, is they look at what people value and the assumptions that they make, and they say, not so, not true at all. And I'm going to write a book that contradicts that ideology and world philosophy. And that's what she tends to do. And so, yes, this is fiction, but it is sort of a realistic portrayal of what it could be in the absence of these sort of damaging stereotypes. So let's get into book two. Jim goes to visit the widow and find out what exactly happened to Antonia. And I want to highlight a couple of different passages from chapter 3 of book 4. So chapter 3 records the story of another woman who is a pioneer woman, and this is the widow Stevens. The widow Stevens is renting the home that Jim grew up in, and she's a neighbor to the Shimerdas. And so it describes her as a woman who's kind of tough with age. She's old. He describes her as being thin and brown and strong. It says she sat down in her favorite rocking chair and settled a little stool comfortably under her tired feet. "I'm troubled with calluses, Jim. Getting old," she said cheerfully. And so what we see about her and Mrs. Stevens throughout this whole chapter is going to be sort of another story of her story intertwined with Antonia's story. So she watched over and cared for Antonia the year that she was going to get married, the summer before that. She let her come over and work on her sewing machine, because women in these days had to prepare a trousseau or something to start their home with. So they made tablecloths and linens and pillowcases, and let's see, we hem stitched all the tablecloths and pillowcases and old sheets. Mrs. Schmurda knit yards and yards of lace for her underclothes. Tony told me just how she meant to have everything in her house. And so she's excited. It talks about how she sings every day. She was extremely strong. And so it says that she peddled the life out of it. She was so strong and always singing queer bohemian songs like she was the happiest thing in the world. Then she got a letter from Denver, and the man said, her husband, the one that she was supposed to marry, her fiance, said that he was getting a job in Denver. And so she worries because what is her identity? Her identity is a country girl. And she says, I can't take care of him in the city. I imagine chickens and maybe a cow, but not the city. But she cheered up, and then she got everything ready to go. And you can read some of the details about the more of the preparations. And she left, and everyone at home was waiting and waiting for word that she arrived. They get one postcard that says that she arrived, but that they're going to delay their marriage until he gets a job promotion. And then it says, one night William came in, and he said on his way back from the fields, he passed the livery team from town driving fast. There was a trunk on the front seat with the driver, and in the back there was a woman all bundled up. He thought it was Antonia Schmurda, or Antonio Donovan, as her name ought to be now. And then the older woman again says, I can walk still, but my feet ain't what they used to be, and I try to save myself. And so she drove over to their house the next day, and sure enough, she wasn't married. And Antonia says, he's run away from me. I don't know if he ever meant to marry me. He didn't have a job. He'd been fired. He was trying to make money off of the railroads by basically scalping the tickets. So he would sell people the tickets, but at half price, and he would pocket the money. And so he was making money off of the railroad, and he had run away from her without marrying her and left her pregnant. So she had so much good in her and had come home disgraced. And here it was, the good one that had come to grief. I was poor to comfort her. So how was it that Lena Landgard and Tiny Soderall had done so well, and they're contrasting it with Antonia? Antonia is the one that had the goodness. She was the one who was guileless, who would kind of believe in the good of others, and she was the one that was taken advantage of. All that spring and summer, she did the work of a man on the farm. Folks respected her. They talked, to be sure, but not like they would have if she had put on airs. She was so crushed and quiet that nobody seemed to want to humble her. She never went anywhere. If I went over at night, she always looked dead and weary. She was afflicted with a toothache, and she was all swollen. She wouldn't go to Blackhop for a dentist because she was afraid of meeting people. And after the winter, she wore a long man's overcoat and boots and a man's felt hat with a wide brim. She watched her coming and going, and her steps were getting heavier. And then one day she came in from the fields and had a baby. After the baby came out, the brother said, you better put it in the rain barrel. It's worthless. And so that was sort of the theory of worth at that time. Unless you came from a reputable marriage, then you were worthless. But Antonia was a natural-born mother. I wish she could marry and raise a family, but I don't know, as there's much chance now. And that ends chapter 3. What do we know from that chapter? Why is that important? It shows a lot in life of some people that you can be good and honorable and just and pure, and life can take advantage of you, which is what happened to Antonia. Then we move on. Jim goes to see her. She was thinner than he'd ever seen. She looked worked down, but there was a kind of strength in her face. The color still gave her a look of deep-seated health. Why, it flashed across me that so much had happened in her life and in mine, and she was barely 24 years old. She says everybody is put in this world for something, and I know what I have to do. I'm going to see that my little girl has a better chance than I've had. I'm going to take care of her, Jim. And thus sums up the immigrant story. They want what's better for those who come after them than they had for themselves, and that is what fires her and fuels her to work hard. And that ends basically the chapter 4 of book 4. And so again, the questions I'm asking you to kind of think through as you're doing this is to make a list of at least 6 characters and fully explain what they reveal about human nature. Traits of pride, selfishness, greed, exploitation of others, fear, shame, triumph, tragedy, and to use complete sentences. You will have an essay at the end of the entire book where you're going to be analyzing a character and what he or she symbolizes. So maintain this with integrity so that you have something to work with as you get close to that writing assignment.